my home. So let your spirit guide, let your word abide. Speak to my heart, Lord. Give me your holy word. If I can't hear, then I know what to do. I won't go on. Oh, I never go on my own. Just let your spirit guide, and let your word abide. Speak to my heart, Lord. Give me your holy word. If I can't hear from you, then I know what to do. I won't go alone. Listen, I never want alone, Jesus. Spirit guide, and let your word abide. So speak to my heart. Speak to my heart. Speak to my heart. Speak to my heart. Speak to my heart, Lord. Give me your holy word. If I can hear from you, then I'll know what to do. I won't go alone. I'll never go on my own. Just let your spirit guide, and let your word abide. So speak to my heart, Lord. Give me your holy word. If I can hear, then I know what to do. Said I'm never walk alone, Jesus. On my own. Guide me, Lord. Speak to my heart. Speak to my heart. Speak to my Speak to my heart. Man. A lot of folk be speaking to our heart. I don't know if it's always the Lord. So speak to my heart. Give us your holy word. To hear from you. Good morning again. It's so good to see everybody. This morning we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. We're not going to belabor the hour. I would be remiss if I did not say what's up, not only to our folks who are assembled here, our partners and friends, our guests, first time and returning. So glad that you are here. I also want to give a shout out to our online listening audience who track with us Sunday after Sunday. We're grateful for your participation and your value of this ministry. So we say happy early Thanksgiving to you as well. If you have your Bibles or the apparatus that contains your Bible, would you go with me to the book of Luke? The book of Luke. Luke. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Once you've found it, or as you're looking for it, would you rest to your feet if you're able for the public reading and hearing of God's word? Luke chapter 22. It's a familiar passage of scripture that I hope fits our context for this morning. Luke 22. Luke 22. Our centering statement, some of you all know it, our centering statement is, we do what? Come as you are, be transformed, and make a difference. Okay, some of y'all act like y'all don't believe that. Can we say it again? We do what? We do what? Come as you are. And what else? And do what? Make a difference. And if you can't remember any of that, what do we do?
Live, love, grow, and serve.
Yeah, man, we on point this morning. We on point this morning. Amen. Live, love, grow, and serve. If you found Luke 22, say amen.
Amen.
And I'll be starting at the 7th verse, and I'll be reading from the NLT translation. And it reads accordingly, Now the festival of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John ahead and said, "Go and prepare the Passover meal so we can eat together." "Where do you want to prepare it?" they asked him. He replied, "As soon as you enter into Jerusalem, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. At the house he enters, say to the owner, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' He will take you upstairs to a large room that is already set up. That is where you should prepare our meal." They went off to the city and found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover meal there. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Verse 14 reads, "When the time came, Jesus and the apostles sat down together at the table. Jesus said, 'I have been eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. For I tell you now that I won't eat this meal again until its meaning is fulfilled in the kingdom.'" I want to use as a subject today, as we continue in our series, Lessons from the Table, lessons from the table, or simply put, at the table. Somebody say lessons from the table. We are 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving, 11 days to be exact. The national holiday that's based on an historical event that took place at the early formation of this nation. It is embedded into the fabric of our country. Thanksgiving, where immediate and extended and even friends come together, near and far, far and wide, for a giant home-cooked meal. These meals form traditions, and these traditions help to formulate our unique family identity. At these meals, we learn order, we learn hierarchy, we learn who Big Mama is. At these meals, we learn who says the grace before we eat. We learn at these meals who cuts the turkey before the meal starts or after the meal starts. We learn at these meals, we learn where the little kid table is. At these gatherings, we understand the process of maturation when we begin to sit at the big folks' table. At these kind of meals, traditions are formulated that help to shape our unique family tradition. At these kind of meals, we see relatives that we hadn't seen in a while. Have you ever received those bear hugs that feel like you're about to be crushed? Thanksgiving. Can you hear the laughter? Can you feel the warmth emanating from smiles and hugs from cousins that you hadn't seen since last Thanksgiving? Here's what I'm discovering. I'm discovering this, Omar, and I've discovered this a long time ago, to be honest, that lessons are learned from the table. Instructions and insight are gotten from the table. History is passed down from the table. Triumph, hurt, and hope are shared at the table. Lessons that help to shape who we are and who we will become are formed at the table. In this text this morning, Jesus uses a traditional feast to set the table, to pardon the pun, to set the table to make his transition from one dimension of life to the next. He uses a national recognized feast to set the table for his transition from one dimension of life to the next. You know the story. Cut it off if you need to. You know the story. Jesus is gathered with his disciples. They have made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem as all Jewish people do around this same time of the year. And as a part of this week-long expression, one of the things that they do collectively and nationally is they have a meal that we have historically called the Passover meal. They called it the Feast of Unleavened Bread because when Moses told them they were about to leave for their escape to freedom, they didn't have time to prepare a meal traditionally the way that they would. And so they had to bake the bread without any leaven in it, with any yeast. And so it was unleavened bread. And so in order to remember this occasion, they baked their bread with no yeast. And they called it the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so historically, they did this every year around this time. And so Jesus is gathered with his disciples to celebrate this meal. But he changes the context. And he says to them, while I want you to continue to do this, as we've always done, only now you do this in remembrance of me. And if you read the narrative in Luke, as we just read, if you read the narrative in Mark and Matthew, you will see there were some unique things that took place while they were around the table. In this text, what we did not read, the text uses the terms that they reclined at the table. In other words, it was stress-free at the table. It was a time of relaxation at the table. It was a time where they gathered willingly together at the table. You don't recline if there's stress. You don't recline if there's tension. You don't recline if you're angry or you're mad at one another. They reclined at the table. As a matter of fact, one of the texts says that Jesus' beloved laid his head in Jesus' shoulder. And so this was a time where they gathered annually around a meal, a feast. We call it the Feast of the Lord. There are some things that I think that we can glean from this text that's important for us as we consider what transpires around the table. Can you pause parenthetically and just think back at your Thanksgivings? I don't care if there was 5 people there, 10 people there, 15, 20, or 50 people there. Can you pause and think back on your time with your family around the table? Can you hear the laughter that transpired around the table? Can you reflect and recall the conversations that took place around the table? Can you remember establishing and building relationships with your cousins around the table? All of that transpired at this place. Lessons from the table. I'm trying to get us to get back to that which has become lost in our society. I want us to get back to a time where I valued you and you valued me and you showed your value because we looked eye to eye and we had conversation. I wasn't texting somebody 3,000 miles away who wasn't in my immediate space and didn't have bearing on what was transpiring. How many of us now, after Thanksgiving dinner, we find our separate spaces and we go violent? And we miss the opportunity to engage a living being in our presence. Because we're spending time with somebody on a phone 2,000 miles away. They should be spending intimate time with their family. What happens when families lose that fabric, that thread that held us together? The lessons at the table suggest that everybody present is important. Everybody, not somebody. I know Grandma was worried that Leroy wasn't going to show up. Leroy been living a little foul. Leroy been making the best decisions. But everybody was wondering quietly where Leroy is. And when Leroy walked through the table, or walked through the door, everybody was put at ease. Everybody was glad to see Leroy. I don't care what kind of mistakes Leroy made. We wanted to see Leroy. That is what lessons from the table are learned, that we don't cast judgment on our family, but we receive them and accept them as they are. Lessons from the table. I think there are a few things that are learned from the table. Can I share them with you? Number one, we learn that one of the lessons we learn from the table is intentionality. All of the preparation and attention to detail that goes up front suggests that this is valuable, that this has meaning. You don't stay up all night cooking and preparing if it doesn't have meaning. You're not scrambling to make sure that the house is tight when family come over if it doesn't have meaning. It teaches us that lessons from the table are intentional. Jesus made preparations before the meal even occurred. He said, when you get to town, I need you to go see this dude. And when you go see this dude, he'll take you to the place that is already set up. How many houses have you walked into where the spread was already set? So somebody thought enough of you and your family that you brought, that they were intentional about your presence. Jesus teaches us from lessons around the table that it is intentional. Secondly, Jesus teaches us the lessons of intimacy. Somebody needs to know it's not the number of people that makes the meal, but what makes it intimate is that it is personal. It's cozy. It's comfortable. It's private. It is designed specifically for you. And I'm discovering, Sister Kia, that while everybody might be welcome, Adrian, everybody ain't invited. It ain't personal. It's intimate. Yeah. Jesus had 190 disciples, or at least close to. Only 12 were around the table. It wasn't personal. It was just intimate. And see, when you get invited to the table, when you get invited to spend time, it is suggested that there's something between you and I that warrants us getting closer. Intimacy. Jesus said, these are the 12 who will help me transform the world. And because these are the 12 that will help me transform the world, then there's a space and a time that I need just for them and I.
Yes. Amen.
See, lessons around the table, you can go hang out with Pookie later.
Okay.
But these lessons that we are gaining from those who are significant to us, we are spending time now. See, the lessons that are passed around the table, you might not get a second opportunity to get them. Jesus says, before I go, before I transition, before I get to another dimension of life, there are some things I need to teach you. There are some lessons that you need to learn. How many lessons did we learn? Big Mama, Grandmama, and them. How many lessons did we learn from sitting around the table? How many lessons did we learn sitting at the kid table, but we overheard the big people conversation? How many lessons did we get? Jesus says, before I go, there's some things that you need to know. Before I depart, before I transition, there's some things I need to make sure that you understand. These lessons from the table are intimate. They're not designed for everybody to hear. Everybody ain't meant to be at this table. This table are for those who've been invited. It's intimate. It's cozy. It's personal. I hope I'm coming through. Lastly, or somewhere near, Jesus teaches us that this lesson, or these lessons that we learn from the table, are intergenerational. We learn that code, that these lessons are intergenerational, Timmy. They are intergenerational. In other words, there are multiple generations that are coming together at one time. They are intergenerational. They are crossing age. They're transcending the demographics of age. You have the baby girl who's 5 to the grandfather who's 75. It is an intergenerational experience that transpires when we come together at the table. And what a way for grandfather to learn the lessons and the culture that is transpiring now. And what a way for that young person to hear the stories of old, of how we got where we are and how we overcame. That intergenerational table, lessons are learned that help to shape and form who we are and ultimately who we will become. There's something to be said, the lessons that are learned at the table. If your gathering only looks like you, then maybe you need to do like Jesus. You need to open that door and make that banquet available to everybody. Because you need to learn some lessons from somebody other than somebody your age. You need to learn some lessons from somebody else other than those who had the same kind of experiences that you had. You need an intergenerational experience so that we all can continue to grow. Text tells us, or at least history tells us, that John was the baby of the bunch. And he happened to be sitting right next to Jesus. And so you had Peter, who was legally grown, and you had John, who was perhaps a teenager by many people's standards. And so you had a teenager in the room learning the lessons from Jesus, and you had a grown man who was Jesus' age, all learning lessons that would outfit them for the rest of their lives. And so these lessons that we learn at the table are intergenerational. These lessons that we learn at the table are intimate. These lessons that we learn at the table are intentional. You don't accidentally invite nobody to your table. Either you did or you didn't. Some of y'all know where y'all live at. If they showed up at your house, they didn't accidentally show up there. They meant to come there. Right? And so these lessons that Jesus teaches us are personal. They are family. Did you hear what I said? I said these traditions help to formulate our unique family identity. Are there lessons that you learn that you walk with today? Are there lessons that you garnered that help influence the way that you think today? I value older people because I saw what older people meant to my family. Nobody could out-cook or out-talk Grandma Lee. That's who she was. Nobody walked with such grace as Grandma Rosa. Nobody prepared homemade biscuits with cheese on them the way that she did. Nobody made much out of little the way that she did. These were lessons that I learned. How do I learn how to keep going forward? Because I saw it. How do I learn how to have stick-to-itiveness and fortitude? I learned it from a grandmother who got her high school GED right before she died. But she already owned 3 houses and a host of land in North Carolina with no degree. So when I look up and life gets hard for me, I don't have any excuses. Because I saw somebody who trusted in God and made much out of little when she put it in the master's hand. These are the things that we learn when our families gather. You don't get this in the block. You don't get this in the hood. You don't get this on the corner. You don't get this from a gang-related activity. You get this from family. This is what transpires when we sit at the table with those who have our interests at heart. Who are going to be with us when everybody else departs. This is what it means to have lessons learned at the table. Somebody say intentional. Somebody say intimate. Somebody say intergenerational. This is what happens when you do that. So I want you, if you don't have any traditions, I want you to start forming some. When you gather for Thanksgiving this year, if you ain't got no traditions, I want you to start forming some. I want you to start building some traditions that will last, that when your young ones get old enough, they'll be able to build on the traditions that you've already established. It ain't never too late to establish traditions. They can be shifted and changed, but lay a foundation for the generation that's coming behind you. And for those who are coming behind, pay attention to the lessons that are being taught. Don't miss grandmama talking because her English ain't all straight. Don't miss Uncle so-and-so who might be a little tipsy with his head turned to the side. There are lessons to be learned in life from people who've lived a little bit longer than you. Don't miss all of that transpires at the table. There's beauty in that level of diversity. The greatest lessons I learned was from those who were considered derelict on the outside of society, on the outside of our community. Those who didn't seem to have much value in me, those are the ones that I sat and got lessons from. Because while they were still doing it, they say, young boy, don't do this. Listen here, boy, don't live like I live. Let me tell you something. And they sit down and they unpack all of the things that they've experienced. And now at 50, I can still hear their words speaking in my ear. They're lessons that will stick with you for the rest of your life if you make yourself open and available to you. Don't discard or discount anybody that's been invited to your table. They have value. They have meaning. And so do we. Amen? Amen. Come on, give the Lord a hand clap of praise this morning. I want to conclude this conversation by saying that we want to create some traditions here at this place and space that we call the Gather. We believe that there's value, immense value in the body of Christ. There's immense value in a church family. And we want to be able to create some traditions that says to us, we value one another. That this is designed to be intentional. There's folks over there who've been over here. A couple of folks been here since 7 this morning. Making sure that when you walked in, the table was spread. And make sure that when you walked in, it would look like you counted. That looks like you've been thought about. There's intentionality. And perhaps, if we can create it here, if you don't have it at home, then you got a blueprint and a model for what it looks like when you create it in your own space. But we want to say that everybody in our family, from the PhD to the notary, to the dude in the boardroom, to the brother on the block, to the sister in the classroom, to the sister on the corner, everyone has the same level of value. And that's what we're saying here today. We all have value. And so do you. Look at yourself and say, I know I'm worthy. No. Just act like you got a mirror. Look at yourself and say, I know I'm worthy.
I know I'm worthy.
Let us say, I know I got value.
I know I got value.
Yeah. When you do that, you know what you do? I'm done. I'm done. Put your hands together. When you do that, you say, Namaste. That divinity in you brings the divinity of the other person. That's why we live. That's how we walk. That's how we talk. That's who we are. That's who we are. I'm done. At this time, I think